Hey everyone, it's Aaron. Crazy news coming out of China the last few weeks regarding Evergrande. And by now you've probably heard of Evergrande Saga, the nation's largest property developer that is now on the hook for $300 billion that the world is now concerned that they may not be able to repay. So in this video, I'm going to show you how Evergrande got to this situation where the entire future of the company is probably going to go down if the government doesn't step in and do something, and what I think the fallout from that could be, not only in China but also globally, because right now a lot of people are speculating and worrying that Evergrande is this generation's Lehman Brothers type moment. Lehman Brothers being the investment bank that failed in 2009, really sparking the global financial crisis and causing a lot of problems, a big recession, of course. And this is a moment that we all have to look into the news headlines and understand what's really being said and how it really affects us, our personal lives, our portfolios, and our opportunities to make investments in the future. So go ahead, smash that like button, and get this video out to more people, because I think a lot of people are looking at Evergrande in the news. It's everywhere, but they're not looking at what's really being said. And in this video, I'm going to go through some details that I think are going to be very important to read past the headlines and make decisions for ourselves going forward into the future. So smash that like button and let's get started. All right, so some quick facts about Evergrande just to give you a sense of the size and scale of this company. They have 778 projects in 223 cities across China underway all at the same time. And people are estimating that this is culminating to them being on the hook to delivering 1.6 million apartments. That means people have already put deposits down on these apartments that have yet to be built. And now with the company's financial future and solvency in question, all these people could be missing out on their homes. In a lot of cases, these are dream homes to these people in China. Upward mobility is a really big thing in China. People coming from rural areas, or they live in large cities that have, slums, things like that. They want the ability to obviously get out of that situation, but they want it's like a status symbol. They want to be seen as moving up the social order. And so this is something that people have a lot of hope, a lot of desire. It means so much to them. And Evergrande is about to dash all of their hopes if they're not able to continue financing activities and finish those apartments. Let's dive into the next aspect of how did the company get here. So Evergrande was on a tear for several decades, doing really well because China had opened up the regulations to allow for a property boom. Honestly, it was probably some of the biggest property boom ever seen in humanity, some people have said. But the thing is, last year during the pandemic, it was suddenly a lack of home sales, which caused a cash flow crunch at Evergrande. And this led to them start to doing crazy things like paying suppliers instead of in cash in properties that isn't finished. So saying, hey, we owe you X amount of money. Instead of that, why don't we just give you 1 or 2 condos instead? And you kind of get it at a discounted market value because we don't want to give you money. And a lot of suppliers took that. The second thing they did is they started asking employees for short-term loans, and if they didn't give the loan, they would threaten their bonuses. Super sketchy. And that's actually not something that, if I ever saw that, if I was working for a company, I'd be very worried. So these two things kind of culminated into last-minute things to see if they could save the day and get bridge financing for their logistics and supply chain of building all the homes, but really was indicative of them starting to realize that they were too far out in front of their skis from a financial perspective. A history of taking on debt and then paying suppliers in commercial paper, which is a very short-term debt instrument, basically an IOU. This all relies on a very liquid and stable financial system, but it also relies on them having a reputation as a company that people want to lend to and are confident will be paid back when they do. And this last few weeks is hurting that reputation dramatically. So now let's look into how the government created some policies last year that really spurred this along as well. So here are the 3 financial rules that the Communist Party of China instituted upon property developers to rein in that ravenous borrowing that they were doing. So a 70% ceiling on liabilities to assets, excluding advance proceeds from projects sold on contract. Second, a 100% cap on net debt to equity. Third, a cash to short-term borrowing ratio of at least 1. So what this means is if these things that kind of impose the amount of money that a company could borrow in relation to the number of assets or cash on hand that it had, if this sort of constraint caused problems for Evergrande, that means they were way over leveraged, dramatically over leveraged. And that's a key thing. It's a key theme that we've been seeing lately, and we saw it in the financial crisis. Being over leveraged really causes you as a company, as a government, as an individual to be very vulnerable to even the slightest change in underlying economic or business conditions. And this seems to be Evergrande's case. So combined with those rules and slumping sales in the last year, boom, they were having problems with making just their debt payments. And since they're so levered for every project, they suddenly have to make decisions. If you can't make a debt payment, well, can you invest in developing a property and finishing a property you've already committed to and taken money for? Really big issues. And you say, okay, well, if this is just a small company, sure, it's one thing, but this is not a small company. They have 200,000 employees, over 770 projects in 223 cities across China. It's a dramatic impact, and that's just them, right? There's obviously suppliers, community, businesses around those areas that if they go under will also be impacted. So it's a pretty big deal. So what will the government of China do to mitigate them going under? Well, here are my thoughts. I think that they're very likely that China may want them to go under, but they're going to contain the downfall. And I think they want it to go under to send a message that no longer can you be crazy reckless with your debt borrowing and the things you do after that. It's really a change in rhetoric that we've seen recently from Premier Xi Jinping and China's government in general, where they're talking more about common prosperity. Common prosperity meaning they want things that are good for everybody. And he doesn't believe that speculating on real estate is a net benefit to the economy and the populace. For instance, Xi Jinping said in a 2017 speech that houses are for living in, not for speculation. So, that was kind of a shot across the bow even then. But I think now it's, Beijing is really cracking down on property developers that are just going hard in the paint with borrowing and building. And it's become too much because we've seen empty apartment buildings, like a dramatic amount of empty apartment buildings just sitting in China. And they're empty because they're purchased by speculators and then nobody moves into them. Nobody buys it from the speculator. And it's just this continual push to have more and more property sold. And it really is reminiscent of 2008 here in the US. So many people buying homes on speculation. So here's the key question. If Evergrande goes under, will that cause a global financial crisis? Could it be a contagion of all that debt not being paid, that default catalyzing or cascading throughout the world, and all the suppliers and counterparty risk of the financial institutions that have it, them having issues? Is this going to be the beginning of the end? I think the answer is no. Yes, it'll be painful. Yes, it will rattle markets. But I don't think it's going to be a Lehman Brothers type moment where it means the end. At least not all at once. I think by now we've been hearing about it for so many weeks that if it would have just happened, it would have happened. Because the Lehman Brothers thing, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, that was kind of like an overnight scenario. Like people woke up and they're like, oh my God, this company isn't solvent anymore. So this has been kind of a slower moving train, albeit slow over the last couple of weeks. But it's something that I think is going to be contained mainly by the Chinese government. The unique thing between Lehman Brothers and this Evergrande situation is Lehman Brothers did seriously have a ton of counterparty risk. That meant a lot of other financial institutions in the U.S., Europe, and around the world had lent them money, were the other side to their derivatives, and when they went under, it was really bad, and a lot of other people suffered as a result. However, the thing is, China's kind of a bit more insulated, its financial system, from the Financial Times as to why this is not a Lehman Brothers type moment. China's situation is very different. Not only are the property sector's linkages to the financial system not on the same scale as a large investment bank, but the debt capital markets are not the only or even primary means of funding. The country is to a large extent a command and control economy. In an extreme scenario, even if capital markets are shut to all Chinese property firms, which is not occurring and is only a tail risk at this point, regulators should direct banks to lend to such firms, keeping them afloat and providing time for an extended workout if needed. The only way to get a widespread lender strike in a strategically important part of the economy would be if there was a policy mistake, where the authorities allow the chips to fall where they may, perhaps to impose market discipline, regardless of the systemic implications. And we think that's very unlikely. This lesson from Lehman was that moral hazard needs to take a back seat to systemic risk. So basically what they're saying is the Chinese government is very likely to bail out this situation with Evergrande. They can also just tell people what to do. They say, you're lending now. You're going to take this hit, you're getting partial payment. It just works differently over there. And I think they have the ability to cordon off the blast should Evergrande truly go under. They can try and protect the rest of the economy. I think it's important also because I almost have a feeling that China's willing to let it happen for this reason. They want to change the habits of the populace, entrepreneurs, business, and the economy to get away from these super risky, speculative businesses where there's making something that isn't, again, fit within the narrative of the common prosperity, of the common good. So this is something that I don't think we have to worry about at the moment. However, and here's another area that may not be thought of initially that is going to definitely be impacted no matter what happens to Evergrande regarding if it goes under or if the Chinese government saves it, and it's commodities. Obviously the property market is a huge consumer of commodities to build all those homes. And so when that demand drops, all the commodity producers, especially economies specifically linked or dependent on commodities, are going to be affected. So looking narrowly at the direct first-round impact on commodities, this event threatens a slowdown in China's property sector, one of two very large, broad-based commodity-consuming sectors of this economy, the other one being infrastructure. It's generally well known among resources sector investors, at least, that China's share of global commodities consumption is anywhere from 40 to 70% of the entire world. But that share of global consumption in China's property sector, of China's total commodity supply, its property sector consumes 40% of steel flow, which is 20% of the global total, 20% of copper, 15% of aluminum, which is 9% of global, 15% zinc, which is 5% of global consumption, and 10% nickel, which is 8% global consumption. So the answer is China property is 5 to 20% of global commodity supply. So yes, Evergrande is potentially a big deal to the commodity world. And Chinese real estate accounts for 1/5 of all global and copper steel supply. So what that really means is, again, going back to the economies that depend on commodities for their economic growth and business, we're looking at Australia for the iron ore. We're looking at Brazil for oil and gas. We're looking at Zambia, I think, for timber. All these countries, and there's probably a whole lot more, that sell directly to China. And it's going to be a big drop in demand for them. It's going to affect those local economies as well. So what do you think? Is this going to be a situation where Evergrande will collapse and it will be a Lehman Brothers type moment, catalyzing a global financial crisis that will be triggered by their default on debt? Or will Beijing step in and save the situation? They may not save the company per se, but they'll cordon off the issues of the debt default and make sure that nobody takes too much pain, but send just enough pain to reinforce a message of no more speculative businesses, no more speculative property buying and production. This is a very interesting time. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and go ahead and smash that like button and consider subscribing, and I'll see you next time.